You've got to help leaders build the mentality that it's most important what you say no to as much as important as what you say yes to. And if you start to build that discipline and then allocate time in your calendar, and when you've got time for your team members, then that's when the real magic starts.
What's one more thing you want to leave our audience with when it comes to helping create and develop high-performing individuals?
The one thing I would say is that
what's the secret to making your team more engaged, more productive, and less likely to leave? You may be surprised to learn it's intentional and focused one-on-one meetings. Brandon Rogers is a leadership coach who used to believe that great teams were built through occasional team meetings and annual performance reviews. He was shocked to realize that without consistent, structured one-on-one conversations, leaders lose control, performance drops, and teams fall apart. Welcome to the Learn It All podcast, the show for today's leaders who want to get ahead and stay ahead, because we believe great leaders aren't born or made, we are always in the making. I'm your host, Damon Lemby, two-time best-selling author and CEO of Learn It, a live learning platform that has helped upskill over 2 million people over the past 3 decades. In a moment, I'm going to ask Brendan to share why weekly one-on-one meetings are the most important thing a leader can do to drive individual performance, his simple 3-question framework to structure effective weekly check-ins, and the mindset shift needed to say no more often to help you free up time for what really matters.
How do you ever expect to maximize the performance of your employees and deliver consistent results without spending deliberate and focused time with them every week?
Geez, mate, I've heard that before. That sounds fantastic. It's for me, it's not possible. I mean, it's why I use that question. Like it's meant to sort of raise the eyebrows and think, geez, you have to spend deliberate time with people. And I go back to, look, I've been managing, leading teams, involved in teams since a young boy. I'm playing sport. I love team sport, and just sort of coaches, particularly when you were young, not so much when you're older, which I think is a downside of some of the coaching, but your coach spent time with you. They spent deliberate time, even though you're in a team. They seem to come up to you more as a child and just, hey, maybe you try this, or have you thought of doing this, or if you kick the ball this way, this might be helpful, that sort of stuff. And I don't know if it is like just that adult sort of little people relationship that they find it more comfortable as we find it more comfortable as adults doing that. It doesn't seem to happen as much as like adult to adult. In the professional sporting world, yes, it's really, really important and does happen a lot more, but it's just not possible to get the best out of your people if you're not being customized to them and having those deliberate conversations. And this is where I'm very big on what reinforced to me. Myself and my wife are involved in caring for kids. We're foster carers. And when you look at that situation, you said you've got young children, and if you're not spending that one-on-one time with them, you're not building that connection, you're not building that relationship. Sure, it's great doing things as a family, but really the intense times and those memorable times that come that you remember with your child is those one-on-one times you have, and you see them thrive, and you see them want to do things for you and to please you and to really make you happy. And I think as adults, we're no different to that. So when you're leading a team of people, again, I reinforce that if you're not spending quality one-on-one time with those people week to week, then you're really missing a trick. And there's no way that I know of that you're going to be getting the best out of those people if you're not spending that deliberate quality time together.
And so what was it? Was it during sports or something in your professional career where you had that pivotal moment where you're like, okay, running structured one-on-ones is really the most impactful and important things leaders can do with their people?
It was that dreaded time in the world called COVID. Heard of it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Haven't we all? Look, I'm sorry to bring it up again. All your listeners are thinking, God, why does somebody have to bring it up all the time? But look, that was the time, I guess, as entrepreneurs, as leaders, that time gave us more time to think. And we saw a lot of change happen in the world, some good, some bad. From a business ownership and a business leadership perspective, all of a sudden you had all this remoteness of work happening, and now there's sort of full remote and a bit of hybrid and a bit back in person, all the mix is there. But what I found, and when I started to think about this, is that leaders had a really, really tough time, A, knowing what their people were doing, and then B, knowing that they were on track doing the right thing, but then getting the best out of them. And they didn't know how to handle that. So what I used to do before COVID when I was working with clients, I used to concentrate a little bit on one-on-one meetings, but a lot on team meetings. And during that time of COVID, I started to realize, you know what? Leaders generally haven't got the level of experience of facilitation that I was lucky enough to have when I led large teams and workshops in my corporate career. So that's a skill in itself, and that takes time. But spending time one-on-one is actually an easier gig for business owners and leaders. I find a lot of people feel more comfortable just having these one-on-one type conversations. So then I started to create some more structure around that based on my own experience of doing one-on-ones when I was in the corporate space. Now, I was inconsistent with my one-on-ones as well. I didn't have the discipline. I didn't have the consistency. And basically, I didn't realize the power of them for all of my corporate, or for most of my corporate career, let's say. But then COVID came, started to understand that people were really struggling. Leaders, business owners were struggling getting performance from their people, the frustration, the annoyance, just all that angst that came with it. And I started to really think about, hey, I need to target in on one-on-ones because that's where the performance starts. You have high-performing individuals comes into high-performing teams, which comes into high-performing businesses. So that's sort of how it evolved. Then I just added a little bit more structure. I tried to really simplify it as much as possible so that leaders could have a simple, clear structure. They could do certain things on a weekly basis, certain things on a monthly basis, and certain things on a quarterly basis. And the other thing that drove it was I'm very much anti the whole yearly performance review. Or I shouldn't say I'm completely anti. There's a time and a place for that. But I think what happens the majority of the time is that those yearly performance reviews happen. They don't happen regularly enough. In that they're just yearly rather than quarterly or something like that. And then they get done, the box is ticked, they get put away on the shelf, and they're never to be heard about again until the next end of year. And then people think, oh, we didn't do that, we didn't follow up on this. It just becomes not useful. So that there's no momentum in that. So the structure I put together, there's a lot of momentum week to week, and it's very difficult to hide if you're not performing. And that's what I like, because ultimately business is about performance.
Absolutely. But a lot of times people look at structure and they say, okay, well, if you're too structured, you're going to really stifle creativity. But you believe otherwise. Let's unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, I do. I believe the opposite. I think structure actually fosters creativity. If you think about just even the podcasting process that we've got, you've got a fairly structured process. There's, sort of booking and some questions and just teeing up some of the structure before we have this conversation. I do the same with my podcast. Well, that allows for us to be on the same page. We're moving in the same direction. But then I can ad lib a little bit. I can have a little bit of creativity in the conversation because we've got a bit of a structure about what we're talking about. Well, to me, that's the same in any business. That structure allows for some freedom of thinking rather than thinking, I've got to make sure I tick this box, or I've got to follow this, or I've got to make sure that happens. We can bring in some structure. That could be automation through systems. That could be some structure through your one-on-one meeting type process, but then it creates space for those other conversations you need to have. And I think one of the other things that structure does for leaders, particularly in a meeting space, is that it stops them talking too much. So one of those real problems I found with leaders and meetings generally is because they don't have a structure, they just talk and talk and talk. And they just become information sharing meetings rather than meetings that are bringing people together to solve issues and to have robust conversations and those sorts of things. So that's why I believe structure is so good. It actually does free people up. And I don't know, what your space behind you looks pretty tidy. I'm sure your desk is fairly tidy. Mine's okay. There's a few bits and pieces around that shouldn't be there. But when my desk is reasonably tidy and clear, it does allow my head just clarity of space, clarity of thought. And I challenge anybody to take that up as a challenge, as an opportunity, that just clear your space. If you think you work well in an untidy space, then tidy it up, get some structure to that, and it's amazing the freedom that brings.
I couldn't agree with you more, because I feel like if your desk is a mess and your house is a mess, it's just frustrating. And sometimes you don't even know where to start. I also really agree about if you don't have a structured process for one-on-ones or really for any meetings, a lot of times leaders just come in and then they just wing it. And then the individual who's there might not even know what the agenda is, and they sometimes even tune out and they don't feel like they're being listened to.
Absolutely.
You've got a great 3-step framework that's pretty simple. Can you share with us what that is?
So it actually forms the basis of the whole meeting process. And I like to get leaders to start with the one-on-one weekly performance meeting. I don't want people to shy away from performance. This is not about, we've got our employees and they're not performing. It's like, how do you continue to get the best out of people? One of the things that I'm pretty sure it's Gallup, because they're the biggest sort of research company in the world around these sorts of things, that there's various studies around there that when people feel like they're growing and developing in their organization, then that's good for their commitment to staying. They'll stay with the organization longer. So this is, again, why I think spending that deliberate one-on-one time is super important. So really there's 3 simple but deep questions in some sort of conversation around the weekly performance meeting. And all I get leaders to start with is, what is the 1, 2, or 3? Again, ideally we get to 3, but even if you haven't done this before, it could be just 1. What's that one key thing you've achieved in the last week? What's that 1? Getting up to 3, but what's that one key thing you're focused on achieving in this next week, in this next 7 days? And what support do you need from me in order to help you succeed in the week? Now, there's some other structure around that we can sort of talk about if we want to, but creating some strategic growth goals for the quarter so that that work is leading up to something that we're growing in our role, we're reaching a level of mastery, or at least on a path to mastery in our role. But what that does is, I don't start with those sort of things. I just start with, get some consistency, get some discipline in spending 15 to 20 minutes. That's all it takes, 15 to 20 minutes with each of your team members each week. Don't put it off. Don't cancel. Don't reschedule. Just get that discipline. Have those conversations around those 3 questions. That builds some accountability in the organization and in your team, because the week coming after you've had that first one-on-one, that first question becomes really valid. What did we do in the last 7 days, or what did we achieve in the last 7 days? Hopefully, it's linked to what you said you were going to do in the next 7 days the previous week. And that's how we start to build that accountability piece. And that can come into the feedback culture that we start to create, because if somebody's not quite, they're saying they're going to do something, but then they're not doing it, then, okay, what is it about, what's happening in the week that's, not setting up for success? What can I do for you? So it starts to really, you start to discern the situation, which really unpacks into that feedback piece. So there's so much stuff that just starts to evolve from sitting down and having a deliberate conversation with your team, with your individuals in your team.
So if these meetings are 15 to 20 minutes and they're pretty structured, does it allow for time for feedback, or do you just make sure you cover what they have and then you need to schedule a second meeting if you need to go deeper into those types of conversations?
This is a really common question I get. And I say, it's up to the leader. Okay, so there are times when you get on this structure and this process where that 15, 20 minutes is more than enough. And what I've experienced personally and with the business owners I work with, when you get really good at this, that is enough, because there's some of those other conversations happening just, day to day and, various check-ins or whatever, but these are really around that structure. When I say it's up to the leader, if the leader and the individual have some time after that meeting, they get through those 3 questions, and then after that, there's through the conversation, something's come out that we need to unpack a little bit more. Well, if the leader wants to unpack it there and then with the person, then they can do that. They can expand the time of the meeting, because remember, it's their meeting. So how long it goes for is up to them. I give that 15 to 20 minutes as a guide. Or if it's a little bit out of scope of this weekly performance meeting, but hey, how about let's do our meeting and let's make some time for that after that meeting, which just runs into it. But back to your earlier point, I'm a big fan of making sure that the people in the meeting know what this meeting is about, because then they're putting their best foot forward and they're knowing that this is the lane I'm in, this is where I need to focus on, and that's about my weekly performance in my role. If I'm coming and people are seeing an agenda and they've got Christmas party here, and they've got some CEO visit here, and then they're talking about some other thing in their workplace. Like their heads all scattered. They don't know what to focus on. They don't know how to contribute well to the meeting. So this is where I'm really big around, again, the structure and keeping it aligned. And up to the, I guess, again, in short, to answer your question, up to the leader to decide and the team member to decide, have we got the time to unpack that now? If not, let's make some time because it's super important.
And I think you owe it to your team to be structured and have that agenda ready to go, Brendan, because if you don't, you're not setting them up for success. They need to be able to come prepared and be able to anticipate and understand what the meeting is going to be about, right?
And look, when even what I say to business owners, and I do this for some of my clients. One of my clients is traveling next week, so all right, we'll just do the email check-in. So with that structure, again, it's very, very simple to say, all right, here's the email, or I've got it templated and automated and those sorts of things. But you've got those 3 questions. They just email back, and then we can have a bit of an email debrief or a WhatsApp debrief and stuff like that. So I also try and make sure that the process is simple enough where if a leader's traveling or something happens in business, because things happen from time to time, that there's no excuse to cancel. That time is made, it's ready and in your slot, in your calendar. So the person as a leader, you should be able to, even if you haven't got it automated, you should be able to send that email quickly and say, hey, just doing your check-in, and that person's made the time already because it's in their calendar to do that check-in. So there's no excuses to not be focused on the performance and and what leads to the growth of the individual in that team.
I think it was a similar Gallup poll. It said, I think 37 or 47% of all one-on-ones are either canceled or rescheduled. So a 2-part question. First of all, why is that happening? And what is the negative impact that it has on your team members when you have a leader or a manager who's constantly just shuffling you around and rescheduling you?
I'll answer the second question first, is that how do you feel if a date stands you up or your friend stands you up? Doesn't feel good, does it?
Not like you're not respected or you're not worth it to them.
Absolutely. Now, obviously, I've never experienced that because I'm a bronzed Aussie, and who would stand me up, Damon?
Yeah, no, you got a good point there. So that's why I wasn't sure you're gonna even know how to ask the question, because I'm sure it never happened to you.
Of course not, mate. Of course not. So, but look, so it doesn't make the person feel valued. It doesn't make them feel good. So now, again, most people are pretty forgiving, and if you do need to reschedule, I'm not saying never reschedule. There are times where things happen and you might need to reschedule. If that's a rare occasion, then that's okay. I'm sure your employee is not going to hang you up and say, you're all of a sudden you're the worst leader in the world. You don't care about me, all that sort of stuff, right? But that should be on very rare occasions. So this is why I'm really careful about saying, don't cancel, don't reschedule. But the caveat is, if there's a life and death situation or something there, then do it. It needs to be very rare, and your employees will forgive you, no problems at all. But if you're doing that week to week, well, it's just, again, it all of a sudden doesn't mean anything. The employees not going to be as committed to it. They're probably not going to be prepared for it because they're thinking, well, they cancel every week, so why should I put the time in to prepare for it? I know what the structure is, but it's probably not going to happen anyway. So that's the feeling that people will get eventually. Back to the first question, I have no studies around this apart from certainly working with some of my clients and being in the situation myself as a leader. I've had the privilege of managing very, very large teams, both locally, nationally, and internationally in my corporate career, especially. So when I postponed or cancelled a meeting, most often it was because I didn't know what I was going to say. I didn't know what the structure was going to be. And then, 10 minutes before the meeting, I'm like, shivers, what's going to happen? What am I going to do? It's easy to cancel it. So you just cancel it or you postpone it. And then if it's postponed, you get to the next day and the same thing happens. So this is what I found. And again, this is why I come back to structure, that if you have structure and a consistent structure around some of these things, and I do the same thing with team meetings, depending on which type of team meeting it is. But if you have that structure, then what I've noticed is that there's less chance of canceling or rescheduling because you're confident in the structure. And that also leads to one of the errors I think that I spoke about a little bit earlier in this conversation, where it also stops, particularly in the one-on-one performance meeting, it stops a leader speaking too much because they've got 3 key questions. Ask the question and listen and seek information, understand from your employee. So that's what I found.
So let's move on to feedback, because we talked about that a little bit. I mean, feedback, I believe, both giving and receiving feedback can be fuel for learning. A lot of leaders struggle with it. So if you're somebody who struggles with giving feedback, as a new leader or an experienced leader, what is step one to get out of that habit and start giving better feedback that can be really actionable for your team members?
I think just look at yourself to start with and think about the situations that you may have had in receiving feedback. Now, that could be from a friend, a partner, a brother, a sister. It could be at some stage in our life. Doesn't really matter how old we are, to be honest. We've received some level of feedback. Now, we probably not receive in a formal way that sort of can happen sometimes in a business environment. But I maintain that when somebody gives you feedback, and feedback can be that appreciative type feedback, it could be that constructive type improvement type feedback. It's just feedback and a different style of it. But whenever I've been given feedback from someone, I've been very appreciative of that. I've actually felt like, hey, you know what? That person cares about me enough to take some time to share that, hey, they really liked whatever I did here, or actually they've seen me do better and they've told me that, hey, I know you can do better in this, and I thought if you did this, it would have been a little bit different. So that's where I think is a really powerful step to take us forward really quickly into, okay, so if I feel like that, why wouldn't I want to make other people feel like that? So Damon, I love it how the preparation you've done for this podcast and some of these really thoughtful questions, really reinforces to me that you put some time and effort into understanding what I think I like and enjoy and what helps leaders grow and what helps teams grow. So that's fantastic. That makes me feel good that you've done that, and I hope in me sharing that information that's made you feel better and supported in what you're doing. You're going to keep doing that. So that's the feeling that people get. And don't people remember how you made them feel? That's what they say, isn't it?
Yeah, of course.
So this is where I think it's a really important step. And I'm not sure that I hear this sort of too much in conversations I hear and podcasts I listen to about feedback, but just think about how you feel when you've received feedback, both appreciative and constructive. And sometimes, yes, it can be confronting getting some of that constructive feedback, but at the end of the day, I found that you appreciate that person more and you trust that person more. So yes, there's an element of trust that has to be there. If somebody comes from off the street, and all of a sudden just walks up and says, "Oh, you Brendan, and I really don't like your podcast," or whatever. You're like, "Yeah, good on you, buddy. What the hell do you know?" But that's a bit random, right? But there's some level of relationship that you should have, and if that's there, and you have the courage, and you think about it from yourself and how you feel about it, then I think if you can keep that in mind, I really think it pushes people over that hurdle, I suppose, of, hey, this is some improvement type, constructive type feedback. Am I going to give it? Do I care about Damon enough? Yes, I do. Do I care about people improving enough? Yes, I do. So I'm going to take that step. I'm going to be vulnerable and I'm going to put it out there.
If you say you're somebody who wants to get feedback, but the second somebody on your team, especially somebody who reports to you, shares with you feedback and you get all tense and upset with them, that's just going to stop. Right. And then when people see that happen, it's going to permeate through the organization. And then, people are going to have a hard time being open and caring and sharing with people. And you and I almost even talked about this before we came on air. Having healthy debate and healthy and maybe even difficult conversations are really healthy for organizations.
Mate, absolutely. It's quite funny actually. I've been in and this was more in corporate days where a leader's gone on some sort of course or program or whatever that they put them through, and I know your organization does a lot of that stuff, which is, again, I'm not. It's all really good stuff, but people get pepped up after a program and a course, and they come back and I'm going to ask my team for feedback, and they put a question out there and say, what could I do better, and then they don't wait for the answer and stuff, and they move on. And I'm like, what just, it's almost like I tick the box of I've asked my team for feedback, but I'm not sitting there waiting for waiting for anything to come in. So I it's one of the things there's a lot of things I love about what I do, but one of the things I love is actually setting up that structure, back to some structure around some feedback. And I love the sort of stop, start, keep exercise, really simple around feedback. And again, just it can be a little one page or just a bit of butcher paper or whatever, but what is that 1, 2, or 3 things? Again, depending on where the organization's at and where the trust levels are at, it might just say, what is that one thing that you'd like your leader to start doing? What is that one thing you'd like your leader to keep doing? And what is that one thing you'd like your leader to stop doing? So that's a really simple structure that gives a little bit of safety to people because, people buy into that simple process. And then we just start to have the genuine conversation around it and unpack that. We always want to make sure, obviously, when we're getting feedback, both sort of appreciative type feedback or constructive type feedback, that we're going to put something into action. If we're getting some appreciation type feedback, so that's awesome. Like, I really appreciate, actually, I didn't understand that that's how you were taking it, and then the audience really appreciate that. I'm going to do more of that. Or actually, when I'm doing lots of ums and ahs in my conversation and and it's taking away from the gist of the story, and somebody's giving me that feedback, that's really important. That's right. I'm going to take that on board. I'm going to work hard on that. So, this is where you've got to make sure that feedback is really good. Somebody's shown the courage and taken the time to share that with you. Hopefully you've got to make sure that there's some action that backs it up so that reinforces the message to them that you're prepared to take action, you're prepared to improve. And guess what? You don't have to be rocket science to realize that when people see that, which is to your point, then they're probably going to be even more emboldened and more courageous to give you more feedback in the future, which is going to help you improve even more. So all of a sudden we get in this virtual cycle of improvement, and that's a pretty good thing for business, right? Because as individuals, if we're in a virtual cycle of improvement, then individuals improve, that leads to the team improving, that leads to the business improving, that always leads to the culture improving, and that always leads to much better results in business.
Better results, lower attrition, people more motivated and bought into the work. And I think one of the key things you said right there is that if somebody gives you feedback and you implement it, follow up with them later and just say, hey, thank you for sharing that with me. You're right. I do say a bunch of ums and ahs, and hey, maybe check out this latest episode with me and tell me if I got a little better at it. If not, keep sharing with me. And what I found, Brendan, is when you do that, just exactly like you said, people will give you more feedback, but also ideas will bubble up all over the place from frontline workers and everywhere, because they just feel like there's more trust and there's more openness where they can come and have those types of conversations.
Absolutely, mate. And I guess the thing that's quite amazing, and I say this a lot, is that it doesn't cost anything, right? And again, I'm sure you're not, doing all these free trainings or anything like that. People need to pay for certain things. I get that, but some of these fundamental things, or I believe are fundamental things in leadership and business, you don't need to pay for. All it is a bit of a time investment and being deliberate about certain things. So, why wouldn't you do it? It's not something, it adds to your bottom line, but it's not taking away from your bottom line.
Yes, that's what Learn It does. We do leadership training and soft skills and all that kind of training. And that's great. I mean, I think it's super important, but a lot of real learning happens in the flow and in real world situations and examples. That really helps with the retention and stickiness of it. Give me an example, whether from your sports days or your corporate days, of a great learning experience you had that helped you grow as a individual.
I don't know if if you or your listeners will like this answer, because it's a really simple one, but it's actually been the most powerful bit of feedback I've ever got, because it comes in my mind many, many times every single day. A lady that was in my team back it was around that 2005 period, 2005 to 2007. And she said to me that, Brendan, you're actually seems weird, but you're actually quite a fun and sort of engaging type person and easy to talk to. But your emails don't come across like that. They start just very direct. And I said, oh, what do you mean? And she said, you just start Damon or Cheryl, or there's no dear something or hey something or whatever. It's just like, that's how I've always written emails. That's just how we learnt to do emails. So every email, like since that time, I've either started with dear. Nowadays, I more say just hey, H-E-Y, hey Damon, hey such and such. So every single time I write an email, I think of Cheryl, because she's the lady that gave me this feedback. And I think that is just such a simple, powerful bit of feedback that's made me, hopefully, a little bit more authentic on email just by that one little 3-letter word in adding and being a little bit more friendly on email. So it's, again, I use that example so often because it's so simple, it's so powerful. It was so random, the feedback that came, and that certainly wasn't anything I was expecting. But I think of that, and I think of Cheryl very often around these sort of things. I actually wrote to her a little while back because I hadn't spoken to her for many, many years. And I just wrote to her and said, look, it was on a Facebook message, I think. I just want to tell you, like, I still so much appreciate that feedback you gave me, because it's stayed with me forever and it'll stay with me until I die, because it's just something that, hey, we use email every day, right? So, this woman, love her or hate her, she is forever stuck in my head.
Well, here's why I do really like that example, because it's not some complex example that you have to do all this hard work to change. It's one simple thing that makes a big impact and can really make a big difference, because a lot of times, let's be honest, people come across much different over email than they do in person. And I think a lesson out there for our listeners and for everyone is, if somebody is coming across in a different way than it seems like how they communicate with you in person, I think you should do what Sheryl does and call them out on it and find out. Otherwise, you might be thinking, oh, this person's upset with me for some reason.
Absolutely. And look, you raise a good point there. It's like, the feedback doesn't need to be sort of this massive big thing, and it can be just a small hallway conversation around something like that somebody really values. There was one other bit of feedback. Again, I've had many bits of improvement feedback, especially. So that's been good for me, I hope. I reported to the global CFO in a role that I was doing, and she'd said to me, and again, unfortunately, I didn't get on well with her, but at least she was quite direct in some of the feedback she gave, and she said, Brendan, that something on the lines that, everything might, it's just because it's a nail doesn't mean you need to use a sledgehammer every time. And what she basically meant when we unpacked that a little bit was that, like, I was always looking for the ultimate answer. Like, I've got a very, in my DNA is trying to find the best result, the best answer, the most accurate answer, that sort of stuff. So that means, I can deliberate too long, I can procrastinate, all those sorts of things. So, in her world, even though she was an accountant, pretty stuffy accountant, mind you, but she just wanted to make sure that even though, she was doing certain things, that she passed on this feedback to me, and making sure that, I wasn't just trying to move from sort of A to Z. It's okay to move from A to B. Know what Z looks like, but just take those incremental steps. And I have to say that is a really, really powerful bit of feedback that I received reasonably early in my career, which has helped me particularly in the coaching world, because I think if I kept that sort of mentality and didn't challenge myself to just say, like some of the basic structure with one-on-one meetings, it's okay to just start here. Just have the meeting. Here's a few questions that can help. Even if you're just getting one thing from your team member about what they're going to focus on week to week, that's okay. We know we can build it up to 3 or 4. But if I still have that mentality of saying, well, no, this is how you do it, this is the best way to do it, then I'd probably alienate, and I probably wouldn't have the clients I have today, because it's a big step for some to go from here to here. It's okay to take those incremental steps and be okay with everything doesn't have to be as accurate or as correct as what you'd like it to be.
What are some roadblocks in the way right now that's preventing either them from being high performers or preventing them from helping their team members become high performers?
Oh, I love that question. And I'd have to say, I actually did an interview just yesterday on my one of my podcasts, Cultural Leadership. And the chap I had on he talked about time debt. And the concept of time debt was effectively prioritization, I suppose. But this is the thing I find hardest for leaders to make these decisions, and in my own business, like, we got to be really clear about what we do, but we've got to be even really clearer about what we don't do, what we decide not to do. Probably you know as well as I do, mate, the amount of requests that we can get on LinkedIn, the amount of touch points, I'd love to have a conversation and all this sort of stuff. And it's okay, I love building relationships, I love connecting with people, but you can't do that all the time. You can't do it every day. So I'll make sure I've only got a couple of limited slots in my calendar every month. And when those slots are full, that's it. I can't take any more. I can send people a link and they can book in and we can have some of those conversations. But you've got to help leaders build the mentality that it's most important what you say no to as much as important as what you say yes to. And if you start to build that discipline and then allocate time in your calendar to what you do say yes to, so make sure that you can actually fit in what you think you can fit in the week, then that makes a big difference from the business owner perspective and their ability to manage their time and to manage their week. And then what I find, that allows them to have time for their team members. And when you've got time for your team members, then that's when the real magic starts. Because it's not, as business owners, we're not feeling like the weight of the world's on our shoulders. We're not feeling like we've got to do everything. We've got to micromanage. We've got to cover this. We're making calls at all sorts of time at night, or we're receiving calls at all time at night. We've got more structure because we're more deliberate about what we're doing.
One of the things I've always seen is that business owners, a lot of times, they're the bottleneck for not being able to scale, because they have to be involved in everything. And maybe because they're saying yes to everything, or they don't have enough trust in their people to be able to do it. I know we talked about this a little bit, but saying no is hard. What is another piece of advice you have for somebody to get better at learning how to say no to something?
The simplest advice I can give is make the choice to say no. It comes back to that mindset, right? Again, everything we do, Damon, you know as well as I do, you would not have grown a successful business if you weren't deliberate around stuff. You've got to be deliberate. I'm going to take this deliberate action. It doesn't always work out, and that's fine. That's the learning process, but I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to make sure this happens. I'm going to be deliberate about it. Well, the same thing with any change we want to make is the first thing that we need to do is say, you know what? I'm going to be deliberate about getting better at saying no. And then when you make that decision, what I encourage, particularly, again, leaders when you're leading a team or working in a larger organization, those that are closest to you, whether that's peers or whether that's, again, for me, ideally team members, because they're the ones you're interacting with a lot, then you tell them, you know what, I've said yes to too much. It's not because all of a sudden I don't want to work, but for me to be the best leader for this team and to make sure I've got space for each and every one of you, I need to help you guys, or you need to help me. So say no to things. I'm working on saying no to things because I need to be more deliberate. I need to have more time in my calendar. When you see me, or even if you come to me and ask me to do things and you think I should be saying no, challenge me. Like, tell me, hey, is this really something you should take on? Should Fred do this because he's the person in the team, or should Jenny do that? She's an expert in this space. So make the decision, be deliberate about it, and then bring in some accountability partner or some accountability partners somewhere that are going to keep you honest every single day. If you do that, then at the end of the day, all of that is still a choice to make sure that if someone's keeping you accountable, you're going to listen to that. There's that feedback link again, and you're going to do something about it. And if you're committed to doing that and you do that enough times, then you're just going to get better and better and better at doing it.
Once I got better at saying no, people are okay with it. They just kind of move on. They're just like, okay, cool. And sometimes they even tell you, I appreciate it because I would hate for you to have taken this on and not to been able to contribute and overpromise and underproduce. So I think people respect you. And I think that's just something that's worth keeping in mind.
Mate, once again, you pick up on a perfect point. It's back to that feedback thing. If people are taking time and they care enough and being honest, then when somebody gives you that improvement type feedback, again, that there's a bit of angst involved in that, but that when people give you that sort of feedback, then when they do give you appreciative type feedback, they probably mean it because that they're being honest about that. And the same in this situation that we just talked about, that doing that, it builds trust because you think, well, they're going to do that, and they've been really consistent with that. So that's what I found anyway.
What are some ways maybe in a group setting or outside of one-on-ones that you could help elevate individual performance?
This is where team meetings come in, or that group accountability. So I really love the nature of team meetings as well. I'm a big fan of meetings. Again, I don't sort of misunderstand that all of a sudden I just think everyone should spend all their time in meetings. That's not it. But I do believe that leaders need to spend more time in productive meetings. So it's no different to coaching, isn't it? And that accountability piece, that I found that if I'm running some group sessions with people and we're coming back week to week with certain actions, or we've committed to certain things, then very, very infrequently, particularly when the group that you're working with are all people from different organizations or different teams and stuff like that, you don't want to be that person that hasn't done their homework. So this is where team meetings can become valuable. If let's say we're having a weekly operational type meeting, tactical meeting. So we're focused on the business for the next 14 days. And again, there's some other structural pieces that need to be around that, whether it's our KPIs and our metrics and our individual priorities, all those sorts of things. But week to week, and the last thing we want to do in a team meeting is wrap up. So what have we agreed today and who's going to do what? And if that's all you record from the meeting, I personally believe that's enough, because that's just the key actions and what's going to happen. And then distributing that to the group, I found nothing more powerful than that group accountability, making sure that everyone's clear on what the people or what individuals in the team said they're going to do. And then 9 times out of 10, unless there's something really drastic that happens, 9 times out of 10, people come and they've done what they said they're going to do. And that works really, really well.
Again, it kind of goes back to your structure talking about, and team meetings tend to be a lot more successful if you do end them with, here's what we discussed, and here's our next steps and follow-ups, and very clear direction on who's going to do what. And then people will come back more prepared, and they actually, I believe, feel like that their time is more respected and valuable than just throwing people into meetings left and right.
Absolutely. Look, there's nothing worse than attending whatever meeting you're attending, and you leave the meeting and you think, what the hell was that meeting about? What's happened from it? What have we moved forward? What have we improved? And I have to say, probably 85% of the meetings that I attended, and probably even a higher percentage of the meetings I ran when I was in corporate, ended up like that. There was no sort of action. They were just sort of more information sharing. So look, I'm speaking from a place of experience now, because I stuffed up so many times for so long, and I started to evolve myself and learn a bit. I'm a big fan of actually the table group and Patrick Lencioni from sort of around that. Well, I think they've moved into Nashville or something now, but they were in the San Francisco Bay area, the table group. But I really love some of their structure around team meetings, especially. They don't seem to do much on the individual one-on-one meetings, but yeah, just being deliberate about what is that meeting about, keeping a bit of a clear swim lane on the topic of the meeting, being prepared so people can come to that meeting to, with some ideas or whatever they're trying to solve, and we can have good conversation, be really clear about why we're here. We can have the best people in the room that can help contribute to solving that issue, and then we can move forward with action. And if you do that, then they are really the fundamentals of meaningful and productive meetings.
That's great. I mean, Brandon, you've been awesome, and we're going to wrap up soon, but I've got a question for you. I was looking at your site. What do you mean that leaders aren't born, they're designed?
I believe it's one of these questions, isn't it? People, they're not born, they're made, and all this sort of stuff.
Well, because let me just start, because my tagline is great leaders aren't born or made, they're constantly in the making. So that's why I saw yours, and I was like, oh, this is pretty cool. So I want to see what it has to say.
So I actually think you and I are exactly on the same page. We just say it a little bit differently. So that when I say leader by design, one of the things I believe is that we're all in different situations in our life. We've all had different experiences. So when I work with a client, and this is where the design came in, yes, there's this word again, there's structure around what I do and how I might do it. And eventually we sort of get to a place, but everyone's coming with a slightly varied or different problem they're trying to solve. And this is where the by design comes in. So from a coaching side, we can start at a different point all the time, depending on what the issue is. And I think from a leadership perspective is the same thing. Some leaders I've worked with have had fantastic experience with one-on-one meetings. And so they're really bought in and they've already got that process in place, but they've never really done team meetings very well. Or it could be vice versa, or somebody's really confident on the feedback side, but they're not really, they haven't really set up performance metrics around their business and their individuals and stuff like that. It's really saying everyone's designing their own journey. My job is to really find out where they're at and start based on what I think I know and my own experiences, how we can design that journey on a path that helps them move from where they are today to where they're going tomorrow. And back to the tagline you used is that's always in the making, right? That's always evolving. What's that saying? The more we know, the more we realize we don't know. And to me, that's the leadership journey every single day. And that's why leaders, we talk about open and feedback and being vulnerable, all those sorts of things. Well, ultimately, leadership is it's not a role, it's not a title, it's action. If we're taking action every day to improve ourselves, we're taking action to be better, then, if we're taking action to help other people improve, then that's leadership. You don't need the title to do that. We can do that as fathers. We can do that as parents. We can do that as friends. We can do that as volunteer people in organizations. We can show leadership every single day. Ultimately, that comes back to choice as to how you want to act every single day.
So as we wrap up here, what's one more thing you want to leave our audience with when it comes to helping create and develop high-performing individuals?
The one thing I would say is that there's always a better way. Now, it doesn't mean to say that what you're doing today is not working. I mean, there's very, very successful business owners out there doing fantastic jobs, but there's always things that we can do better. There's always things we can improve. We don't have to have the solution. We may not know what the solution is, but if you keep that mindset of improvement, we know that things can be better, then we can seek those things out. So that's that learning, that's that growing, that's that always evolving, always moving. If you've got that mentality and mindset around everything you do, then I think there's nothing you can't achieve.
Yeah, that mindset and always being curious. And I
Absolutely.
couldn't agree with you more that there's always a way to get better and do things differently. Well, Brandon, you've been awesome. I mean, we talk about the importance of being deliberate, having structure, how running one-on-ones consistently is one of the most important things you could possibly do. So I've really liked all of what we've talked about. I think my favorite thing about you, though, and what made me really like you, is the work you do or the love you give these foster kids. For somebody who loves children, I just want to thank you for doing that. I mean, that's wonderful to hear. So where can our listeners connect with you at?
I'm on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn's a really good place to connect on. Or if they want to know more or learn sort of more about me, they can go to my website, leaderbydesign.au. And there's blogs, there's content there, there's podcasts. The Leader by Design podcast is a narrative style podcast I do. And there's the Cultural Leadership podcast as well there, which is an interview style podcast, which you will actually be appearing on at some stage in the very near future.
Yeah, thank you. And I want to just point out to our listeners, as I was preparing for this interview, I went through and I listened to most of your Lead by Design, and those they're like 15 to 20 minutes, and they're great nuggets of learning. You can just go for a walk with the dog and knock them out. So I highly recommend checking that out. And so do me a favor, listeners, check out Brandon's work, check out his podcast and everything he does. And until next time, everybody, stay curious, keep growing. Have a great day.
You have a unique voice. You have a unique way of putting words together to express ideas. And that way will become even